For the second race of the Human Comedy, we have a 1 hour race at Trial Mountain with a BAC Mono. And this car is a bit of a mission to drive on its own. It's quite a struggle on the throttle. You have to be quite gentle with your throttle inputs because it swings all over the place. So shortly I'll show a full lap of the track to hopefully help give you more of an idea of how to drive the car with the throttle inputs and everything. But thankfully this race is a whole lot more straightforward compared to that first race we did with all the changing conditions. This entire race is dry. We just have to worry about changing old tyres and fueling up the car. So for upgrades, pretty much just buy anything that improves the performance of the car. You can only use mediums or soft sport tyres in this race, so just go for the mediums. Upgrade the engine, pretty much anything that improves the handling. The power restrictor, you don't need ballast for this because there's no PP restriction, there's just a horsepower restriction in this race. So just pretty much buy anything that improves performance. And then you can just detune it in the car settings and the tuning. And in the racing section, just buy the performance parts again, and then the racing brake pads and discs, the fully customizable suspension, all of that. You don't need the race tires, you don't need the intermediate or wet tires. Now for the setup, so pretty much just copy everything I've got on screen. I ran the race with this, it felt pretty much as good as I could get it to feel. It's a tricky car to drive, so you're just going to have to be careful with your throttle inputs. Everything that I've got here is fine. The main thing is that you restrict the horsepower. I've restricted the power down to 82, which is 303, whereas the limit's 304, so that should be fine. You don't have to adjust the gear ratios, I've just done it out of habit. And then I put the brake balance towards the rear slightly just to get a little bit more rotation under braking, because the thing understeers a lot in the sport tyres. For this race I ran the fuel map on number 2, I ran the traction control on number 1, and the brake bias on number 3 towards the rear. The brake bias I just brought back to help give myself a little bit more rotation under braking because the thing understeers a lot, like I said before. And the fuel map, I could have even probably got away with running this on fuel map number 3, it would have been a tiny bit slower, saved a little bit more fuel. I finished quite far ahead at the end of this race. Fuel map 2 seemed to do the job, and I probably wouldn't risk going number 1 because at the end of this I pitted twice. And I filled up the tank both times to the max, and I only finished with a couple laps, maybe 3 or 4 laps of fuel at the end. So I was pretty much bang on. Just run on fuel map number 2 and run some good laps. We're just going to look at one of my good laps here just to help give you a bit of an idea of how to drive the track. Just running into the back of the AI there. They drive the corner terribly slow and then they just take off on exit. So I want you to pay a little bit of attention to my throttle and brake, more so the throttle inputs because that's where you go wrong. Yeah, for the first turn you have to brake quite early. There's like a little bit of a yellow barrier that sticks out on the right there. Kind of brake just alongside there, gently bringing the car in. It struggles to bite, so you just got to be patient. Just very gentle on the throttle through here, cutting a lot of that turn, coasting through here, just very slowly picking up the throttle again. Only when we're dead straight we get back to 100%. Braking just before we enter the tunnel, third gear, just letting the car bite up and only then beginning to accelerate on exit. Just being gentle because as we get to that crest there the car gets a little bit light. Braking before that white GoPro sign on the right there, it's a little braking marker. Bringing the car in, slowly picking up the throttle. Here, just lift off the throttle before you turn to the left because the car tends to swing around there. Just be careful there. And also don't hit any of the walls because if you hit the walls you get a 1.5 second penalty. Here, just pulling the car, letting it grip up along this inside area, beginning to pick up the throttle and then hard down the main or the longer straight down through the tunnel. So yeah, avoid all the walls as much as you can. Don't cut anything or run wide on corners and hit walls because every time you hit a wall too hard it costs you 1.5 seconds. Down to the end of the straight there's a curb on the right just after it starts right there. You want to brake, bring it down to the third gear, just gradually pull off of the brake because if you drop the brake too quickly the rear sometimes steps out. Just picking up the throttle gently up the hill, and here just before this right kink lift off the throttle because if you're accelerating hard as you turn through those kinks the rear flicks out. Here just being gentle, coming down to second gear, let the car grip up, picking up the throttle slowly, get to third gear, dropping down the hill. As we're going downhill we begin to brake, keep it in third gear, just pull it onto the inside, again just slowly picking up the throttle, using a bit of the exit curve, using all the track available. To the final turn we want to brake just after this curb on the right starts, about a car length in, braking in second gear, run up right up to the sausage curb, just again gentle on the throttle in this little straight here, and you can cut a little bit of this curb, pick up the throttle, don't hit the wall because again you want to avoid getting a 1.5 second penalty. And to the line that is 1 lap, and that's basically a 2 minute 3 second flat lap time, which is the fastest I've done so far. Pretty good. Okay, so now onto the main meat of the race, and thankfully this race is not too difficult, it's quite straightforward. It's just a dry race right throughout. about driving good consistent laps. You'll have 2 pit stops if you're driving it the way I am, with medium tires, medium sport tires, and fuel map on 2. I pitted around lap 11 and 20, so you should be looking around those periods to be pitting for, and both times just fill the tank right up to the top. It should be fine. On my attempt here, I actually double stinted my first set of tyres. So in the first pit stop, I didn't take a new set of tyres. I ran them all the way to about lap 20, where I took a set of tyres there and ran it to the end. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, even though it worked for me. I wouldn't recommend this because towards the end of the tyre's life, in that middle period of the race where the tyres were really old, I was losing like a lot of time, 4 to 5 seconds in a lap compared to my brand new tyre sort of lap times. And it only takes about 5 seconds for you to change your tyres. So if you do the math, I think it's more worth actually taking new tyres on both of the pit stops. But this worked for me, so honestly either method would work. I would probably recommend to change your tyres on both pit stops though. I've only attempted this one time, but it worked out so well for me on the first time. It honestly doesn't seem that complicated, just about being consistent and try not crash. I did see on the previous video that somebody mentioned in the comments doing this race that they had a better time with the soft tyres. You probably have to pit an extra time, but if you want to give that a go, then sure, but this method worked perfectly fine for me. I finished quite far ahead. I think I finished about 50 seconds ahead of the next driver, so for me there was no real issues. Another thing that's really worth noting is the AI seem to be super inconsistent with their lap times. On that first Tsukuba endurance race, people were saying that the AIs were doing really unrealistic lap times. I did see somebody point out that on the easy difficulty, the AI were going super fast, and then they change it to normal difficulty or the harder difficulties, and they're actually slower. If you have your AI difficulty on easy and the AI are going flipping fast, then change it to the normal difficulty or maybe even hard, but jump off of easy, see if that makes a difference. And if that doesn't change anything, I just suggest restart the session, let the AI reset themselves, and then run the race again just to see if things changed. Because for me personally, I've had no issues with the AI being too difficult. I've gotten through both the missions so far on my first attempts, and I run on the hardest AI difficulty, so maybe that's a part of it. My last video was actually quite long because I went through everything as the events unfolded, but this race there's just not a whole lot to talk about. It's very straightforward. I hope I've gotten across all the info that I need to. Just make sure you get the 2 pit stops out of the way, drive conservatively. If you're driving with a wheel, it might be a bit easier to save your tyres. If you're driving on a controller, it might be a little bit more difficult to keep your tyre life going. It's mostly just the car. It's actually quite difficult to drive, so if you're struggling with all that, just turn your counter steer assist up a little bit and that might help. And then if you win the race, you get the same kind of reward as you did with the first one, which is like 1.2 million, a nice meaty prize. And as you can see right here, I finished 45 seconds ahead of the next car, which I think is quite comfortable. And if I didn't have the crash, it would have been closer to an entire minute. Extra tips are always welcome, so if you have any, feel free to leave them in the comments section. And one thing I've just thought of that I didn't actually mention before is for the final pit stop, so I can't remember what, I think I said that was around lap 20, you could probably just put on the soft tyres for the final stint, just to give yourself a little bit of extra pace towards the end. I didn't actually think of that. I'm hoping this will give you enough knowledge to take on this race and get a win. You can obviously experiment as much as you like. This probably isn't the absolute optimum method of doing the race, I'm sure, but it certainly was more than enough to get a win, and with, like I said, without the spin I would have been an entire minute ahead. Fiddle with the AI settings a little bit, that might help you with the issues you had in the first one. I hope they fix that, because that sucks. Like doing 57-second lap times at Tsukuba on that first one was absolutely insane. Humans can't do that. Remember to check out simrace247.com for your latest sim racing news and updates. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.